Okay, hello everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thanks for spending time with us.
I was hoping for a bigger turnout, but we'll just get started anyways. We got a lot of content to cover. So thanks for joining us. Today we're going to talk about cost optimization, how to take control of your AWS costs, how to stretch your runway to go further on AWS. So my name is Ryan Massavecchio. I'm a solutions architect based out of Toronto, Canada.
And my name is Lee, based in London, also startup solution architect.
And thanks for joining us. So just to dive in here, just to talk about what we'll talk about today, a quick overview of the AWS Cloud Financial Management Framework. But really what we want to focus on is more about the tools and strategies that you can leverage to optimize your costs. So how to manage your spend, how to cost optimize, and how to also forecast your costs and monitor your costs. So setting up alerts so that you'll know when costs will hit certain thresholds. Just want to start off by talking about a little hypothetical story. So this is supposed to be a startup audience. You may or may not relate to this story, but imagine you have a fantastic app, an idea for a fantastic app, and you want to get it out to the public. So you've spent sleepless nights, countless hours trying to get this thing out. You finally get it out and get your MVP out there, but you find you're spending more money, right? But then you get the traffic increases. So you need to scale. Then, of course, with scaling comes more spend. So what do? You start researching and figuring out ways with the no time that you have, how to decrease those costs. So you've heard of RIs and SPs, and you've made a couple of those purchases, even though you don't quite understand how they work, which did decrease your cost. So that was all well and good. And as time goes on, you still kind of see that you're growing. Your business is growing. You're adding new features, which is great. More people are coming, more traffic coming to your site or to your application. And this is raising costs again. But then, maybe on a Friday afternoon, on the way out to the cottage of a long weekend, you get an email from your CFO saying, what is Amazon EC2 and why has it just cost $5,000 more this month than last month? So that's what we're here to talk about today, how you can avoid these huge spikes in your cost on your AWS bills and how you can take better control of that. So again, just want to quickly touch on the AWS Cloud Financial Management Framework. So all the tools and strategies we'll talk about here today, they fall into 4 major categories of the framework. The first one is plan, and that's all about setting your expectations for your costs. The next one, run. On those tools in the run category is more about managing and controlling the cost. The save category is about optimizing and reporting, getting better visibility on your costs. And finally, the save category is how you can optimize that further and actually use things like savings plans and RIs and all the tools that we'll talk about today, how to continuously keep on top of your costs. So along with that, so that's just a brief overview of the framework. So I highly encourage you guys to go and do some further reading on that. But for today, I want to focus on we want to talk about the tools and strategies that you can use and leverage. So we want to provide you with a systematic playbook that you can follow to start getting a better handle on your costs. And it starts with ownership. So in your organization, you want to set up like assign an individual or a team the responsibility to manage those costs and be the champion in your organization around costs. So raising awareness for costs in your organization in AWS. The next one is partnership. And what I mean by that is you want to establish a partnership between your financial teams and your technology teams. So allow the technology teams to have a more understanding of the finance aspect of things in the cloud, and then allow the finance stakeholders to be more technology savvy and make sure they have a good understanding and maybe have regular cadence and a communications channel between them to constantly keep on top of things. And after that's done, then you can go into having a good organized cost structure, which we'll talk about in some of the tools today, how you can achieve that. Next will be getting better visibility into your costs, and that's all around establishing value-based KPIs, and I'll talk about that in depth. After that, then we'll go into the tools and strategies you can actually leverage to decrease your costs and maintain that at a good level. And then also want to talk about forecasting. How can you forecast your costs? And how can you even monitor your costs so you get alerts when it hits a certain threshold? And then finally, there's a big piece about education. So you want to always keep yourselves educated on upcoming new features from AWS and how to maintain your costs. There's always new features coming out. Like this week's a great example of all these new costs that were cost optimization factors that came out for these new services and features that you can leverage to continually stay cost optimized. So always keep on top of that, and we call that keeping a good cloud IQ at AWS. So this is just, the way I've laid it out here is more like a systematic approach, but you don't have to, like you may be on a different part in your cloud financial management journey. So we just find when I talk to customers that following this kind of systematic approach is the easiest way to manage the cost, but just be aware that you may be at a different part in your journey here. So the first two on the screen here is more about like ownership and partnership is more around people and culture change. I don't want to focus on that today. What we do want to focus on though is more around the tools and the strategies and the practices you can use to optimize your costs. So just want to give you a heads up here. One of our customers, Lyft, was able to leverage our tools and strategies that we're going to tell you today to lower their cost pretty significantly. If you're unaware of who Lyft is, by the way, they're a pretty big ride-sharing company out of they're global, and their costs actually they tripled in 2 years straight, and then again doubled in 2017, I think it was. So the ridership, by the way, like their business, and that. So what they've done to lower those costs, they've set up a cost per ride unit metric. And then with our tools and strategies, which we'll talk to you about today, we're able to lower the cost per ride metric by 40% over 6 months. So it was like huge savings by them. And this is just one of the main ones that we wanted to highlight because they're started as a startup as well. So yeah, hopefully by the end of this session, you'll be able to leverage a lot of these tools, which are, by the way, free. A lot of these tools that we'll talk about are free to use. So really want you to know what they are and leverage them. So I'll pass it over to Lee.
Cool. So I think we can get started from the first step in the cloud financial management playbook. So we're going to cover the first step. It's called cost organization, and it's a step that you really focus on to having a clear account structure and also tagging strategy. So the result of this, so the result is you can assign the right cost to the right lines of the business. So let's start from one common use case that we typically hear from customers, that you start from one account and you start building, testing, and it's really quick to get started with. And as your business grows and you started to think, oh, how can I improve on having a better performance, having a better permission management and security, and also how to allocate the right cost to the right lines of the business, the right team. So if you are a SaaS provider, how to assign the cost to the right tenant. So with all these questions, we really recommend to start thinking of having a clear account structure from as early on as possible. And you can see AWS account as a container for AWS resources. With multiple AWS accounts, you can set up the right security and permission models across your multiple AWS accounts. It also helps you to set up resource limits, for example, API throttlings for. So you can set up different API limits or throttlings for different AWS accounts, and also it really helps you to have a clear pricing model for your different accounts. So how can we help you to set up a clear AWS account structure? One of the tools that can help you to get started, especially if you haven't utilized multiple account structure, is AWS Organizations. And we start to see more and more startup customers are using this tool. It's basically you can use the tool to quickly start with a multiple account structure to group your existing account or new accounts into organizational units. So sometimes if you see OU, so it's a short name for organizational unit. in this example, for example, you can see multiple accounts are grouped into sales, finance, and retail OUs. And you can apply for different permission policies on the OUs and also on the account level. From pricing perspective, how will AWS Organization help you? So you can have one consolidated report, pricing report across all your member accounts. And also you can have a better control of your saving plans and reserved instance for either specific account, or you can apply it for all the member accounts in your organizations. And of course, there's other benefits. For example, you can set up guardrails or permissions on specific OUs or on specific accounts. But for today, we're focusing on the cost benefit. So the next question you may have, okay, so now I can see the accounts. So I can see the AWS cost by accounts. How can I have a more granular view of cost by projects, by tenants, by applications? And so this leads to the next topics of using tags. It's really important to using tags. So it's not only to help you have a good handle of cost, but also you can start to interact with AWS resource with a very clear and structured manner. So tags is a key value pairs, and the key is the attribute that you want to assign. And the value is the description for the keys. And in AWS Cost Explorer, so where you want to see your cost spent across your AWS account, you can drill down to, so you can break down the AWS cost by tags. And typically we see customers use tags so when they design tags, they design with business tags. So for example, by teams, by geos, by cost centers. And so you can map it to the traditional financial reporting. But we also see companies are using tags by environment, by your applications or programs.
Speak up a little bit, I can't hear you.
Okay. So once you define tags, how do you ensure your teams apply consistent tagging across all your AWS resources, because you want to make sure all your resources are tagged properly, and you want to have a view of how your resources are tagged. So you can use tag policies. So tag policies is a type of policy that can help you to enforce the standard taggings across your organization. And you can define tag keys. So for example, in the picture, if you can see, the tag keys is department. And you can define how do you want to have your values to be capitalized, and also you can define the allowed values for each of the tags. So this is tag policies, and with tag policies you can apply with AWS Organizations. So it means this policy can be applied to all the member accounts within your organization. Once you define tax policies, you can apply it in a soft enforcement manner. So for example, if you have resources that do not match with this tag policy, it can be, so your users can be notified through soft enforcement. But you can also use hard enforcement to actually terminate the resources. And we typically see more mature organizations use hard enforcement tagging policies. And once you have defined tags and also tag policies, how do you review whether your accounts are tag compliant? One of the tools in the AWS console is called Resource Group Console. So it's where you can generate report or search for resources based on their tags. In the Resource Group Console, there are several tools. One of the tools is called Tag Editor. It allows you to search based on resources, based on regions, resource types, or tags. So you can have a list of all the resources and shows the tags attached to the resource. And if you find any of the resources that are not tagged, you can add tags through the console. And the other things you can do from the resource group console is so you can define tag policies through the console, and you can also generate a tag compliance report. That so it's a CSV file that you download with all the resources with your tags. So if you do want to do deep dive analysis into the resource and their tags, you can generate a report from this console. The next, Ryan will take us through how to have a better visibility on your cost.
Thanks. Yeah, so that's all about how you want to have, like what Lee just spoke about, a better way to understand, like how to set up a good organization, to get a good baseline. But then the next, like a really important step here is having good visibility into your cost. And to do that, you want to have these value-based KPIs and value-based drivers. And that's, again, like I was talking about what Lyft did. What do I mean by value-based KPIs? So imagine someone in your organization, raises a flag saying our AWS costs went up 10% year over year. What can you glean from that other than costs went up 10%? Imagine, now that along that 10% cost, they said, your web searches grew 50%, or your hotel reservations grew 30%. So is that now a cost, or is it actually an investment? So how do you attribute that, right? There's value drivers, there's business value drivers, such as, like, for the example of a hotel reservation agency, is searches and listings. These are business value drivers that are tied to cost-based metrics. So how do you take advantage of that? You have to build value-based KPIs, or come up with some kind of value-based KPIs, such as cost per search or cost per listing, in the example of a hotel reservation site, right? But make sure it goes, like, when you come up with these KPIs, they're it goes against the whole organization, not just for a specific team. So on the bottom right, cost per microservice or cost per job, a back-end job, is probably not the best KPI that you want to choose, because you want to align that with the cost-based usage metrics in AWS and align them back to these value-based KPIs that are important for your business. So that's all about the visibility. Now I want to talk about the tools and strategies that you can use to optimize your costs. And the first one, I don't know how many of you are aware, is rightsizing. The whole concept of rightsizing is choosing the right instance size, or the right resource size that fits your workload needs, fits your capacity requirements. In other words, don't over provision your things. Like, this is the cloud. Like, take advantage of the elasticity of the cloud. You pay by the hour. You're not having to pay up front for these huge capital expenses anymore. So right-sizing that, and it becomes iterative as well, right? So as your business grows, you're going to need more capacity, and review if you need certain sizes at that existing size, and maybe iterate on that every month or so. And a good service in Amazon that you can really leverage right-sizing is Amazon EC2, obviously, right? The way you would want to do this right-sizing process, first start by analyzing what your patterns are against your instances. So, for example, CPU, look at how much CPU and memory and networking you're using, and then, like, identify the patterns across those, right? Then, obviously, a really low-hanging fruit that a lot of people don't even realize is causing a lot of money, a lot of spend in your environment, is turning off those idle instances, like those dev instances that you've just been sitting around for months. I've honestly saved my customers thousands based on this. In some circumstances, turn those off. Obviously, make sure that you don't need them, and then turn those off. Or just take a snapshot and turn those off if you don't need it. And then when you do, for the instances that you do need, select the right instance family, right? So one of the general practices that I talk to my customers is about, if CPU and RAM, if of your instances, CPU and RAM is at about 40% over 4 weeks, then you can probably cut that in half, and linearly you'll save half the price off that instance type, right? And another really good rule of thumb, with instances at least, is do that right-sizing process first, and then purchase reservations for them, such as savings plans and reserved instances. So do the right-sizing process first. And again, iterate on this every month. Speaking about instances as well, the Graviton-based instances, which now, as of this week, there's Graviton 3 in preview, are a huge savings that you can leverage. they offer 40% better price performance compared to comparable x86 instances, is the Graviton ones. And they're ARM cores, Neoverse cores that are custom built by Amazon. So definitely leverage those. There's a lot more instances than just these. It's a little bit of an older slide. They have, I think, 12 different instance types that you can choose from. These are just the first ones that came out, I think, a couple years ago. They also have, along with those instance types, they also have ones with the NVMe-backed storage on them, as well as bare metal options on the Gravitons. Just to show you as well, like we have a lot of customers that are leveraging Graviton today. To highlight one of them on the screen here, honeycomb.io. They provide an observability platform tool. They were actually able to move their entire ingest worker fleet over to the Graviton 2 based instances. By doing that, they can run 30% fewer instances. And with that, each instance was 10% less. So huge savings across the board on various use cases. So definitely take a look at Graviton.
Yeah, I think they're definitely not the only customers. I've also have customers just benefit simply from moving to the Rightsizing to Graviton 2 instances and have a huge cost savings. So the next, I want to show you a couple of tools to help you to Rightsizing more easily. The first one is for EC2 instance, and so it's in your AWS Cost Management Console. There is Rightsizing recommendation tools. And it's really easy to use because you don't have to configure everything. It automatically takes into your past 14 days of EC2 instance usage and to identify if there's any idled or underutilized EC2 instance that can be downsized or terminated. And it's also identified if to apply saving plans or reserved instance how much estimated monthly savings can bring to you. And all the underutilized EC2 instance, you can so it also can to scan across all your member accounts in your organization. So you can do the scan across all your member accounts EC2 instance in one go in a single view.
I think we're just frozen here. Hold on.
Yeah. Okay.
There we go.
So the next tool can help you right-sizing. It's called Compute Optimizer. It has a bigger scale than the than the cost than the previous two that we recommended. So it's used machine learning and to scan over your usage over EC2 instance, EBS volumes, and Lambda functions. And to suggest you with if there's any configurations that you can improve on. And since this is a startup audience and you've probably already been using the serverless options, so we really want to drill down into how to optimize Lambda cost. And so maybe before I continue, I want to ask if any of you are using Lambda functions or using serverless features in your workload. Raise your hand if cool. Okay, so I hope this is interesting to you. And so to think about optimizing Lambda functions, you want to understand first what is the cost factors behind Lambda function. So there are three. The execution time of your Lambda function, but also the number of executions of your Lambda function, and also the data transfers. And so before we go into specific techniques, I want to remind you that at the end of 2020, there was a pricing model change on Lambda function. It was built per 100 milliseconds. But from the December 2020, the pricing model changed to per millisecond. So it means if you can reduce your Lambda function to under 100 milliseconds execution time, then it can help you to reduce. Then you would have already benefited from this pricing model change. So next, I would cover some specific techniques that you can use to further optimize your Lambda function cost. The first is really important to choose the right memory configuration for your Lambda function. So maybe you think, okay, if I over-provision my Lambda function, it will bring an additional cost. But actually, sometimes if you over-provision a little bit, it can reduce your duration time of your Lambda function. So the increase of the Lambda cost may be negligible or maybe even decreased. So do not assume the smallest memory configuration always means the lowest total Lambda cost. We really recommend you to test your Lambda functions with different memory configurations. So one of the solution can help you find the optimal Lambda configuration is called Lambda power tuning. So it helps you to automatically test different Lambda memory configurations, and it also generates a graph for you, so a line chart to show the cost and performance, so you can track the optimal point of the memory configuration. And the other factor to consider is the runtime for your Lambda function, and generally the compiled language would usually runs faster, but it also takes a longer time to initialize. So if you do use compiled language, it typically works better with the application that requires very heavy computational complexity, or if you have provision concurrency. But if you have a small function and with simple functionalities, then the interpreted language would actually works better. The other factor to consider is to try to minimize of the dependencies and libraries in your initialization code, because that's typically is the major contributor for the latencies before you actually started running your Lambda function. And another perspective to think about reducing cost is to increase your elasticity. And that's, I think, we really want to recommend to consider auto-scaling. So with EC2 auto-scaling, you can, so it helps you to auto-scale your instance when the traffic is up, but it also helps you to turn down the instances that when you don't need, so when you don't need it. So overall, it helps you to reduce cost, but also to be able to dynamically to adjust to the traffic. But auto-scaling doesn't just apply for EC2 instance. It also applies for ECS task, DynamoDB table throughput, and also Aurora replicas. So there's a tool, maybe it's not very commonly known. It's called AWS Autoscaling. And through AWS Autoscaling, you can define a target utilization matrix across different resource types in a single view. And there's another solution can help you to improve on elasticity. It's called Instance Scheduler. It's a CloudFormation script that you can deploy, and it helps you to configure if you have a specific start and stop schedule for your EC2 instance, and also RDS instance as well, and you can apply the schedule across multiple AWS accounts and across multiple regions. So these would be quite useful if you have non-production workloads or environments if you want to terminate outside of business hours.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. So that was about increasing your elasticity on the cloud. So another good thing you want to leverage is the different pricing models, the different pricing options you have available to you in AWS. So those being on demand. So on demand is obviously the one we're very familiar with, right? You pay by the hour or by the second, depending on which instance you use or which resource you're using. And that's good for spiky or fluctuating workloads. There also is the reserved model, the reserved pricing option, and that'll allow you to get significant discounts in exchange for a reservation for paying up front for a specific term, so 1 or 3 years. And that's more for like your steady state workloads or more predictable usage, like such as databases. You also have spot instances, which I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with. This is a very good option to be choosing because you get 90%, up to 90% off, depending on the instance type that you use. And that's more for your fault-tolerant workloads. The on-demand one is very good for the ones that for your workloads that you're not quite familiar with yet, or you're just getting into the cloud, spiky, fluctuating. But if you have a better handle on what your workloads are, then definitely you want to leverage the other two options, so reserved or spot, for those more steady state based workloads or fault tolerant workloads. So just to get into it here, the spot instances, just starting here, spot instances, this purchasing option again, 90% up to 90% discounts, with the concept being that it's like it's capacity that Amazon has that's spare, so the price fluctuates. So you would set, the way it works is you would set your maximum amount that you're willing to pay for the spot price, or for a specific instance, and when the spot price goes above that, the whole caveat here being why you're getting the 90% off is that Amazon can take away that instance from you when that instance or when the spot price goes higher than what you set your instance price to, or when they need the capacity back. So that's why this is for fault-tolerant based workloads, or workloads such as background tasks or data analytics type things. With savings plans, so this is on the reserved side. Before I go forward, how many people know about savings plans, first of all, over here, and how many are actually using them today? Okay, how many don't know about or not? Okay, sorry, let me rephrase that. How many don't understand it? You don't have to be shy. It was very confusing when I first read about them as well. Let me try and clear this up for you as best as I can. Savings plan is pretty much, you get a discounted hourly rate for your instances in exchange for paying for them up front for 1 or 3 years. And literally that's as simple as it is. You pay, let's say you buy a savings plan for $10 an hour. So you'll get any instance, depending on the options that are here, that you see here, you'll get any instance for up to $10 an hour at the discounted savings plan rate. You have 3 different types. The EC2 Instance Savings Plan is the highest discount that you'll get. It's up to 72%. And you can choose whichever instance type you want, and you have the flexibility to choose the size or the operating system or the tenancy in that 1 or 3 year term and change them as you need based on your workloads. So, and that's in contrast to what you couldn't do with reserved instances in the past, right? Then you have the compute savings plans. That's another option that's also good. It provides way more flexibility than the EC2 instance savings plans. In addition to the 3 that you see in the middle there, you also get with this one, you can change instance families and regions. So for example, if you purchase a savings plan for $10 an hour for the next year, you find that your workloads change and you want to change a region or change an instance family to this new Graviton, for example, series of instances, you can do that while still reaping the benefits from a savings plan. You don't have to do any of this exchanging or anything. It'll just use it up. So, and by the way, I forgot to mention, if you have more usage over that $10 an hour that you've purchased, you'll get charged the regular on-demand rates. After that, and you can either choose to buy another savings plan on top of that for another year, and that'll cover you for that at the discounted rate. And then just recently this year, they came out with Amazon SageMaker savings plans, which gives you up to 64% off for eligible ML-based SageMaker instances. So really good to use here. And how you purchase them, which is another confusing topic that I don't think they're very clear on in the documentation. The easiest way is in the Cost Explorer console. There's something called savings plans recommendations, along with the reserved instance recommendations. So it bases that off of your historical usage, and very conservatively will say, okay, based on the past, well, actually you can choose the past week or the past month. Amazon will say you should probably buy $7 worth of a savings plan because you'll save X amount of dollars. And that's a very conservative one too. They're not being liberal about it. From there, you can even download a CSV file and say, okay, you know what? I know that in a month from now I'm not going to need these instances, so maybe I'll tweak it to be $6 an hour or whatever you want. So that's how that works. It's very easy from that console. You can start from there, download the CSV, and then understand which savings plan amount you want to buy. Staying in the reserved pricing model option, we also have the existing reserved instances, which was what came before savings plans. So savings plans is now the best way, the most cost-effective way to buy EC2 instances. But for the other remaining services that you notice at the bottom of the screen here, so that's where you want to purchase a reserved instance for, because it'll give you up to 72% savings depending on which service and depending on which instance type. Again, in exchange for paying for the instances up front for a term of either 1 or 3 years. And at the same time, so along with paying up front, you don't have to actually pay the whole thing up front. You can choose, you'll get the most discount if you pay all of it up front and then not pay anything for the rest of the term, so 1 or 3 years. Or if you don't want to pay all that big chunk of money up front, you can choose to do half of it up front. And then the other half is spread over the rest of the term, and then you just pay the discounted hourly rate, depending on which instance type you choose. You also have the third option of no upfront. So you don't have to, you still get a discount. It's not as good as the all upfront, but you just pay a discounted hourly rate, which is not quite as good as the highest discounts you get with all upfront. And I hope that made sense. I hope I cleared things up with savings plans. We're going to be around after the talk if you have more questions. I know it was just a really quick overview, but definitely pull us aside if you still need some clarification on that. So the other, and again, for the reserved instances, the services are at the bottom there, RDS, Elasticache. Definitely take a look at these. Again, in Cost Explorer, you can see which instances, based on your usage, you should buy a reserved instance for. So it's right in your cost management console. It's free to use. And also this year, staying in the reserved instance, the reserved pricing option model, CloudFront now has its own reserved model, and they're giving you up to 30% discount. That's what it is, 30% discount for paying upfront as well. So, for example, if you spend $70, and actually along with that 30% discount on CloudFront, they're giving you 10% discount on WAF usage as well. Now that's why they call it the CloudFront Security Savings Bundle. So to give you an example of how it works, all you have to do is if you know how much you're gonna use, again, it's got a recommendations tool in there based on your historical usage. You can commit to $70 of CloudFront usage, and that'll give you $100 worth of actual CloudFront usage. So that's where you get that 30% discount, as well as $7 because you're doing $70 worth of commit. That'll give you $7 worth of WAF usage as well. That's about 11.6 million WAF requests. So definitely take a look at that. Huge savings there if you're using CloudFront.
Right. So continue on different pricing models. So we are looking into DynamoDB service. There are 3 different capacity modes that DynamoDB offers, and you really want to choose the right capacity mode based on your traffic patterns. So the first is provision mode. So you would specify the number of read and write requests per second, and then you'll be billed by the hours based on your specifications. But provision mode also works with auto scalings. So you can set up like CloudWatch alarms, and auto scales can help you adjust with provision mode. So when you use provision mode, it's not a fixed. So it's not a fixed set of the throughput. But provision mode works better if you have a steady state, a predictable workload. And the second type of capacity mode is on demand. So it's very flexible, and you don't have to predefine the throughputs that you need for your DynamoDB tables. And DynamoDB can automatically adjust to your traffic with the throughput. So this type of capacity mode is really good for if you have an unpredictable or changing workload, or if you have a small dev test workload that you just want to quickly to test. And the last type of capacity mode is reserved capacity mode. So if you can predict how much throughput you need, then this type of so the reserved type of capacity mode is really good, because it can provide you with the most significant cost savings compared to the other type of capacity mode. And I also want to highlight that in the reInvent, we launched a new type of access patterns for DynamoDB, which can further help you reduce cost. So it's called DynamoDB infrequent access tables. So I think that's really exciting new release. So if you do have data, so for example, requires a long time history like logs, social media posts, but you still want to keep it in DynamoDB. So DynamoDB infrequent access tier can help you reduce cost for 60% storage cost. And then, so next we would move to storage. So how can you reduce cost on different storage services? So the first we want to look into is EBS, and if you're using EBS, you're probably already familiar with GP2 volume types. So it's a very common volume types, and the idea behind GP2 is the larger the capacity you provision and the higher IOPS you will get. So sometimes you can end up provision more storage capacity than you need it because you need the high ops. So GP3 storage types is announced to address this challenge. So it allows you to provision performance independent of storage capacities, and also still offers 20% of lower cost. So GP3 is designed to, so if you have an application that requires high performance, but you still want to have a lower cost, and if you're using GP2, so I would recommend you to consider to look into migrate to upgrade to GP3. And with GP3, so you can see the specifications of IOPS and throughput. Regardless the volume types of GP3, you would have a base of 125 megabytes of throughput and also 3,000 IOPS. But if you want to have higher IOPS and higher throughput, it's also possible. So the highest throughput is 1,000 megabytes per second, which is about 4 times higher than the highest than the maximum throughput of GP2 volume types at the moment. And the next storage, of course, is S3. And with S3, it's really important that you utilize different storage tiers based on your object access patterns. So starting from the frequent access to very infrequent access, so we have different storage tiers, and to help you to identify which tiers would be good, so would be right for your object, there are a couple of tools that you can consider to use. One of them is called S3 storage class analysis. So if you have a lot of S3 objects, and if you do not have visibility of how frequent they are accessed, so it's quite difficult to identify the right object class. So you can look into to use S3 storage class analysis. It would analyze the S3 access patterns and to tell you which is the right class, and you can use the S3 lifecycle to migrate to the right storage class. There's another tool in the console called S3 Storage Lens. It generates a lot of metrics for your S3 objects and bucket. So it helps you to tell, for example, when was the last time you accessed the S3 object, and maybe based on those metrics, you can identify the objects and buckets that you hardly use. So maybe you already forgot, and so you can further reduce cost from using these tools. And one of the tiers in S3 really want to highlight is S3 intelligent tiering, because sometimes if you have unknown or changing patterns of your object, and it's quite lots of work to move from one class to another. So intelligent tiering helps you to do the work. So there are at the moment 5 access tiers within intelligent tiering. and one of them is newly launched during this reInvent. So how would intelligent tiering works? So once you have the object in the S3 intelligent tiering, it started with so it started with assigning with frequent access tiers, and after 30 days, if intelligent tiering identified there's no object being accessed, it would automatically move it to the infrequent access tier, and after 90 days, it would move. So if there's still no access on the object, it will move the objects to the infrequent, to the instant accessed archive tier, which is newly launched during this reInvent. And there are two other optional archive tiers: the normal archive tiers and deep archive tiers. So you can also set up rules of after 90 days. For example, to move the S3 storage to the archive tier, and after 180 days to move it to the deep archive tiers. So with using, so if you use intelligent tiering, there's very little operational overhead, and also there's no charge for lifecycle charges and also retrieval charges. But if during any time if your object is accessed, the intelligence tiering would move it back to the frequent access tier. And also similar to S3, EFS also have different storage class, and so there's the EFS infrequent access tier. So if it has lower cost compared to the standard EFS storage tier, but it has a slightly longer per operational latency. The standard EFS class has a single digit of millisecond latency, and the infrequent access tier have double-digit millisecond latency. And in EFS, there's also lifecycle management, so you can use it to move files from one class to another. And there's also EFS intelligent tiering, similar concept to S3. And the final tools that I would recommend you to consider to look into your console is called Trust Advisor. So it doesn't require you to do much work, but it helps you to identify some of the interesting findings. So for example, do you have any underutilized EC2 instance, EBS volumes, idled RDS instance, and also do you have any unassociated elastic IPs? So these insights are automatically generated from the tool.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Lee. So also to highlight on Trusted Advisor, you do need to get these cost-based metrics. You do need at least a business support plan to see these. But if you do have at least a business support plan, these are highly recommended. That it's like low-hanging fruit cost savings right here. I've saved, I think, $3,000 a month last year with one of my customers, seeing that they've used this tool to find idle RDS instances they didn't even know were running for like 4 months. They turn those off, $3,000 a month savings right there. So Trusted Advisor is a huge benefit you should definitely take a look at. So that was all the tools and strategies for optimizing your costs. Now I want to talk about how you can monitor your costs and how you can forecast your costs for future workloads. This button's not working here. So Cost Explorer is a fantastic tool that you should definitely take a look at, free to use. I'm not sure has anyone had a chance to play with it at all? Are you even aware that it exists, Cost Explorer? Okay. How confusing do you find it? A little bit? Yes, so do I. There's a bit of a learning curve. It's not that serious. Once you start playing with it, you'll understand it. It gets easier, and they're constantly iterating on it. So it's actually not as bad as what it looks like when you first open the console. It pretty much is a tool that gives you full visibility of all your costs across all your accounts. If you've tagged your resources like we were talking about before, you'll be able to break down your costs by tag. So let's say if you want to know what your development team is doing, you go into Cost Explorer, you say, okay, let's see all the resources that have the development tag on it. How much is it costing me on this account? Or for this other tag, like saying, all my prod resources or anyone who's in this team, anything you want for your tags, you can break it down in Cost Explorer. it also, and you can go as far back as a year with Cost Explorer. Not only can you look at costs in Cost Explorer, it does usage as well. Did anyone even, I wasn't even aware of this myself. Did you know that it did, like, so for example, you can track data transfer charges, not charges, data transfer usage. How many gigs are you using in data transfer? Yes, exactly. How much S3 storage in gigs per tier are you using? And it'll show you that breakdown as well. Or how many instance hours, and you can actually break it down per the hour, not even per the day. How many instance hours are you using across your EC2 instances? So very handy tool to use, free to use. Another huge feature of Cost Explorer is forecasting. This is where you can get your forecast for up to 3 months with daily granularity, or forecast for up to 12 months with monthly granularity. This is huge, and it's based off of ML algorithms, and it's using your historical spend. So it constantly iterates on your past usage and then forecasts your future usage, and it'll give you a variance as well. That's what those lines are on the right. How much based on so. For example, if you have a pretty steady state workload or steady state spend, it'll be pretty accurate. So it's very good to use. Take a look at the forecasting options. You just have to set in the Cost Explorer tool future dates, and then it'll just pull up. That's what it'll look like on the display there. The other tool here, so that's for forecasting. For understanding and getting alerted when you are going to hit certain numbers of spend in your environment, AWS Budgets is what does that. And again, free tool to use. Definitely leverage that. You can say, I want to get alerted when my spend hits this amount of money, or when it hits 90% of this amount of money, for example. Budgets will do that for you, along with not only just getting alerts, Budgets will also, it has custom actions built in. That's a paid feature, but not that expensive. 10 cents per action, I think it is. Where not only getting alerted when your spend hits a certain threshold, you can even say, okay, when I'm hitting 90% of my spend, let's set up an IAM policy that says deny any more instances from running this month. Like, that's huge things that you can take advantage of, that you can save some costs with this tool. But at the same time, not all those budgets will tell the same story. Obviously, your business is going to have organic growth, right? And you're going to get alerted when it's not like for natural growth. Your business is growing. You don't want to get those alerts, because that's good. That's tying back to the business value drivers, as well as what if you set those thresholds too high? You're going to get some spikes, and maybe it won't hit that threshold, but still it's too much spend. So how do we deal with these? There's another tool called AWS Cost Anomaly Detection. So that's more for the complex-based usage patterns, where it will, I'll actually change the slide and explain it to you in more depth, will show you, based on your historical usage, identify anomalies and send you an alert based on that, based on the fluctuations of those complex spending patterns. And it's very easy to set up. All you have to do is you create your monitor on either an account level or a tag. So again, tagging your instances, you'll be able to say, oh, for these instances that have these tags on them, I want to only alert on that. And then once you've done that, you would set an alert subscription, a threshold, just like you would with your budgets. But the difference being, if you set, so let's say, for example, you set a threshold for $20 of this anomaly detection alerting threshold. If the tool sees that your normal spend is $100 a month or that month, you'll get alerted at $110, because that $10 was your threshold. Or did I say $20? Well, if your threshold is $10 and your spend is $100, you'll get alerted at $110. But it automatically changes. So if next month it's $200, you'll get alerted at $210. So it changes based on it's an ML algorithm as well. It'll change and it'll fluctuate based on your spend. And it also has but also that's going to introduce potential inaccuracies sometimes. So there's a portion in this tool that you can submit false positives, and it'll improve the ML algorithm over time. So it's pretty accurate that we find.
Yes. So the other aspect I want to bring up is so before, if you are building a new workload or consider to migrate to the cloud, so do you want to have a right estimation or as correct as possible estimation on your future cost on the cloud. So one of the tools you can use is using the pricing calculator. You probably already know. So you can define the services that you plan to use, and then it generates a total estimate. So you can model a cost on AWS Cloud before you actually building them. And there's a little quirky feature that related to pricing calculator is if you're using CloudFormation, now there's the option that you can enable to estimate cost when you're launching so when you're deploying the CloudFormation stack, and it would automatically generate a pricing calculator link and shows you the estimated cost based on the resources in your CloudFormation stack. And the other tools, if you're considering to migrate from on-premise infrastructure to AWS cloud, there is a tool called AWS Migration Evaluator. So it's basically evaluate your current on-premise infrastructure and map it to the equivalent of AWS resource. So in a way, it can save your time if you're considering of migration. So we just covered all the systematic steps that in the cloud financial management playbook. So you can kickstart with activities of having a sound cloud financial management. And so we covered some of the strategies and the tools, and hopefully can help you leverage to have a better control of your cost. And so we are here to help, and I hope you have your AWS account team. So do reach out to the account team for any events or services that we can help you with managing your account. But before we finish, here is the list of resources maybe can help you to manage your AWS cost. So we really recommend to stay on top of all the new feature launches, because if you're aware of all the new features, it helps you to optimize your AWS cloud environment. And also sometimes there's new launches on pricing model changes or pricing reductions. So do keep aware of if there's new features or pricing model changes. And the other thing we really recommend is to have a look of the AWS Well-Architect wallpaper. So especially in the white paper, there is a pillar called Cost Optimization. And it actually have a very detailed explanations of all the strategies and tools that we have covered today in the greater details. And there's even a well-architected lab. So and the lab is designed for you to have a hands-on practice with the tools and the strategies that we talked about today. And the other thing you can look into, so there are trainings that you can sign up to, and also there's a web page about cloud financial management. So I think we just really want to thank everyone to stay for the session, and hopefully you find it useful and you learn some strategies and tools to help you manage AWS cost. And before you go, if we can ask you to fill out the survey, and also we'll be here to stay up for any questions if you have.
Thanks so much, everybody. We'll be around here for questions.